This is not a tutorial channel. Originally, this channel was created to showcase my work, my social media, and my assets. However, I believed we could share our experience by talking about creative process, tools, and art in a general context. In this video, I want to show you how I create this scene that I post on my Instagram during Christmas. It took approximately 14 hours of work to achieve this result, but I will explain the process in more detail shortly. That said, hello and welcome to Red House Tree. My name is Steel Ramon, and today I will give you a brief overview of how I completed this project in such short time. To start, I was swamped with overdue content for the channel. My initial plans was to release the first video at the end of October or early September, but I only finished everything in December, just before Christmas. While everyone else was posting themed video, I wasn't sure if I should release my content at the moment. In the end, I decided to create a Christmas-themed scenes from scratch with only 7 days left, without using any object from my asset library. This was challenging since I didn't have any planning. Of course, the objects were created from scratch, but not all the textures. I made some on the spot, but by the time I reached this stage, there was less than a day left for Christmas Eve, so I relied on my personal texture library. I spent Christmas Eve and part of Christmas Day adjusting the scene. Even with the main scene ready, I still tried to create a more detailed background. However, since nothing satisfied me, I ended up spending hours researching elements that didn't make it into the project. This experience reinforced the importance of planning. Working purely in freestyle without reference, I felt lost several times and had to redo main part of project. For those practicing without deadline or big goals, this can be productive, but without planning you lose efficiency and compromise quality. So organize yourself prevents delays and raises the level of your work. Now, I did like to talk about scenes elements. Do you know that strange feeling when looking at a piece of art filled with details, yet something still seems to be missing? This probably has to do with the overall ambience. Many people forget that ambience is tied to the whole and not just isolated elements. Lighting, colors, object placement, everything influences how we perceive an environment. Our brain tends to adopt a macro-thinking approach, focusing on the most prominent element of a scene, usually the biggest or most eye-catching. For example, when imagining a living room, we think of a sofa, a chair, a TV stand, or a television. But those items alone aren't enough. The sofa is important, but what about the rug at the entrance? Where are the keys? Did someone live in such a rush that they left a soda can on the stand? And those coins on the table, are they yours? Do you see what I mean? A scene is composed of everything, from the main elements to the smallest details, like a slipper hiding under a cabinet behind the sofa. In my Christmas scene, this becomes evident. As I added more elements, the compositions became more robust and complete. Here, I want to offer advice that might sound contradictory considering how often I emphasize the importance of planning, but it's about common sense. Don't stick too rigidly to your plan. Planning is a guide, but if it's overly strict, it might lead you to abandon a project that only needs a slight adjustment. During this project, I reconsidered ideas and adapted to a new reality several times. Although I started with a freestyle approach, I established a simple foundation. I knew the scene would feature a window above the fireplace, facing the sofa, bookshelves, and the Christmas trees near the fireplace. To add more volume to the sofa, I decided to place a cabinet, which by the way is very similar to one my mom has at home, which also happened to sit close to her sofa. The rug between the sofa and the fireplace is a common sense addition. Even without detailed plan, I defined the scene's elements well, which was easy not only because of practice but also due to macro thinking. Notice that the elements I described are large and prominent, and our brain tends to highlight them. Although they are not sufficient on their own, they help map out the composition of the scene. The great thing about creating scenes is that the individual elements can often result in amazing standalone renders. For instance, this project gave me a few renders that I turned into shorts, and they turned out so good that I decided to work on them a bit more. maybe even post that on Instagram. By the way, if you are not following me there yet, I kindly ask you to do so. The Instagram account's new, but I gradually built it up. Plus, there are projects whose results were only posted there as I didn't have enough material to make a full video about them, but they were already finished. Talking about adapting plants, I will share how I made the Christmas tree. Normally, I create objects with as few vertices as possible, not exactly low poly, but also not overly detailed. So it's counterintuitive for me to accept that the tree has over 100k vertices, but that's okay. I tried to make the tree manually, but that's not my strong suit. I can create stylized trees, but when they need to be realistic, I run into difficulties. Fortunately, I use Blender extension called Sapling Tree Gen, which generates trees procedurally. This means that by adjusting a few settings, I can get a good result without problems. However, since the foliage consists of hundreds of small objects, the vertex count is very high. But since my goal was just to create a small Christmas animation and not export the model, I didn't mind the high count. Basically, the foliage in these extensions work like a particle system, but the instance of those particles are turned into real objects, generating many of them and therefore a high vertex count. For those looking to create models for the game, it's important to understand how to optimize the smaller elements as they can make the project heavier. Unlike the approach used by this extension, optimizing foliage, fur or hair follow the same principle as a hair cards. Basically, we use the particle system to render a group of particles into an image format like a hair strand or a cluster of leaves, and then apply this texture to a lighter object, such as a curve, so we can shape the hair. This drastically reduces the number of vertices because hundreds of vertices that previously formed a strand are now represented by a render image. This allows you to configure your curve more efficiently for when you convert it into a mesh. Still talking about adaptation, there were some design changes during my project, and the most significant one was with the Christmas lights. I was thinking of keeping everything with a low vertex count, and after so much time modeling and not sleeping properly, I didn't even realize I was obsessing over something that I didn't make sense. I mean, the Christmas tree already had high numbers, so it didn't make sense to keep trying to lower the rest. You see that? I initially used a simple curve to create a wire, then apply an array modifier to add the light along the path. It didn't take too long for me to readjust my idea, but it was a poor decision made in the middle of stress. So here's a tip: a lot of work and little sleep affect judgment, even in the simplest things. That's why staying healthy both physically and mentally is essential. If you push yourself for too long, the fatigue will affect your ability to think in theory, and that's when creative blocks occur. So, understanding that, eventually, work will pile up and mistakes will happen, is the first step to balancing your tasks and reduce how often it happens. About redesigning the Christmas lights, I used a small trick that I think beginners will find useful. The design I chose was the traditional one, with wire resembling a braided rope. Achieving this effect might seem more complex than it really is. I only needed to create a circle, add a mirror modifier, enable mirroring on the X and Y axis, and then, in edit mode, align all the circles in parallel. After that, I added a screw modifier and increased the screw value. And there you go, a rope, or in my case, a wire that looked like a rope. The next step was to add a curve for the object to follow, align it horizontally with the curve x-axis, and then, in the curve's edit mode, drag it along the x-axis so its tips nearly touch the origin point. Now I selected the rope object, add an array modifier, change the z factor to 1 and the others to 0, and finally added a curve modifier to select my curve and adjust the deformation axis until it matched correctly. And voila, a fully functional rope. Now, every time I increase the count value in the array modifier, the rope extends following the curve. Remember to move the rope object along with the curve or they will misalign. You can always use Ctrl+P to parent the two objects so you can move them together without issues. Another thing that might seem complicated but isn't is the shader I created for the gift under the tree. They were quite simple thanks to a node you might not know yet. Instead of creating multiple shaders with different colors for each gift, which would take a lot of time, I created a random color palette for the wrapping paper. This way, each object using the shader would have a specific color combination for that palette. To create the base colors, I used the following node: Material Output, Principal BSDF, Color Ramp, and Object Info. For the wrapping paper detail, I used the Texture Coordinate, Mapping, Voronoi Texture, and a mix to combine everything. First, I connected the render output from the object info to the color ramp and I added the desired colors to the color ramp palette. Then I connected the color output from the color ramp to the B input of the mix node. For the A input of the mix, I duplicated the color ramp, kept it connected to the render output, and configured a new palette of secondary colors. At this point, the base and secondary colors were set. The next steps was to define where these colors would be applied in the shader. To do this, I connected the UV output of the texture coordinate to the vector input of the mapping node. Then I connected the vector output from mapping to the vector input of the Voronoi texture. I linked the distance output from the Voronoi to a new color ramp, and then connected the color output of this color ramp to the vector input of the mix node. Finally, I connected the mix output to the base color of the principal BSDS, which in turn was connected to the surface output of the material output. And that's it! Now you can apply these shaders to multiple objects and see the random distribution of colors from your palette. It's important to note that, for this material to work correctly, it needs to be applied to separate objects. For example, if you apply the shader to a group of boxes, but they are part of a single object, they will all receive the same color. Finally, with all the textures in objects properly placed in their respective position, it's time to reveal the final result. So, here's my Christmas scene.
We wish you a Merry Christmas. We wish you a Merry Christmas. We wish you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. We wish you a Merry Christmas. We wish you a Merry Christmas. We wish you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year.
This project was incredibly fun to work on and helped me exercise several skills with almost no external assistance. There are some elements I think are worth mentioning, but aren't the focus of this video due to their complexity. My goal is to keep the channel content as accessible as possible so that anyone can understand what I'm showing. For that reason, topics like the particle system I used for the snow or creating the fire and the room's atmosphere using volumetrics will be covered later, with more time and care. However, if you just want to see how these elements were made, my next video will be a time-lapse of this project. It will be a long video considering the 14 hours of work into about 1 hour. To make it easier, I will try to mark some parts of the video using time codes. Well, this is the part where I say I hope the things I've been sharing with you are helping you as much as they've helped me. That said, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, leave a like, drop a comment, share the video, and to stay updated on more news, check out my social media links in the description. See you next time!